Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 29th of January 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio is Mike Robinson, and we'll be joined by live Skype link by David Scott with Northern Exposure. Well, yes, I'm wearing a woolly pulley because basically it's pretty cold here in the studio in Plymouth, and I've been led to believe that if we switch on our electric heaters, that's going to pull down the last of the grid in UK. The French are unable to provide that necessary backup power, and we would have a blackout throughout the whole of UK. So obviously we want to avoid that, so I've put my sweater on. Well, the weather today, we're going to start off with the real weather, which is the weather north of the border. And here is a picture provided by David Scott. Of course, it's showing Scotland at its very best, bleak, rainy with, it's not drizzle, he's got a special name for it. I'll just bring that picture on screen because it is spectacular, taken by David himself. David, I will let you comment, but I just wondered, was this Scotland's new high-speed road link you've pictured here?
Yes, that's the civils infrastructure leading to the New Forth crossing. No, that is in fact provided by our good friends at Visit Scotland. This is how we encourage people to visit Scotland, by showing them a wet day on South Uist.
Well, it's wonderful. I noticed in the sea just to the left of that picture, I think, is that a bit of the sea? I think so.
I think it is, yes.
Yeah, I'm sure I could see a periscope there, and I thought, well, this would be a President Putin submarine come to spy on the Scots in preparation for his attack on Europe. Well, that's what David Cameron would have us believe. And this picture I was a little bit concerned about because to me it showed the Scots simply pouring away the water that should be coming south of the border into England.
Well, we do have rather a lot of water just now. You're very welcome to as much as you can come and carry. But we obviously don't have a giant connecting canal. That's the Lagan Dam, and if anybody watching has seen the BBC sitcom Monarch of the Glen, that is the glen in which it is set and was filmed.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. Well, we're just going to ask for a little bit of help from UK column viewers here. If you're weak disposition, please turn away. But this came up on my calendar this morning. I thought it was pretty scary. We'd just like a bit of assistance. Can anybody identify the object that's popped up there for, well, when is it? For Tuesday next week. So anybody can help with that. Just tweet or text in. But some form of nuclear fission going on there.
Oh no, you see the mistake you've made there, Brian, that you've got your weather set up for London. I mean, I know Plymouth hasn't seen that object for 3 months now, but that's the reason you're seeing the wrong thing.
Okay. All right. Thank you for explaining that to me. Where are we going to start? We're going to start with a very serious matter of the death in Oregon in the US. And Mike, you've been following this.
Yes, because the FBI has released this piece of video onto YouTube. It's about 25 minutes long or so. And I guess the reaction that they've had, certainly the allegations that Robert Finicum had his hands up at the time he was shot, has caused them to push out this video. So let's just look at a couple of seconds of it. And you can clearly see there that he is in fact walking from the car with his hands up. Struggling to get through the snow, and then his hands go down, and the next thing he's on his back on the ground. I'm not going to show that. You can go to the YouTube video if you want to watch it. But what was absolutely clear following this is that, contrary to what the FBI was saying, he received no medical attention. He was not dead when he hit the ground. He was still moving. And in fact still was trying to put his hands up. He received no medical treatment for quite some time after the shooting, and somebody's got to bear some responsibility for the fact that he eventually passed away.
It's horrific, Mike. But of course, this is police state America. The internet, YouTube, full of videos of American police shooting people with their hands up, shooting people in wheelchairs. So there's a vicious culture coming to the US police, and of course we're now starting to see the same culture come into the armed police in UK. David, what's your opinion on what's taking place in Oregon?
Yes, it as you say, it's one in a long line of events. I would have to say that the Americans had a revolution for an awful lot less oppression than they're currently undergoing at the hands of their own police force. And I saw in the BBC programme Question Time, one of the questions from the floor was from an auxiliary constable who was adamant that all police officers in this country should be armed because they do such a special job and risk their lives. Now, I would suggest that if all police officers should be armed, and looking at the reason that this particular gentleman brought to the argument, then all of us should be armed for our own safety. Now, Britain hasn't been an armed society for many hundreds of years, and we've got along quite well without it. And I fear for what's coming. And you have to say that from an American point of view, if you are a lover of liberty and a believer in some of the things that many of the Americans believe in, founding fathers and all the rest of it, although we could debate exactly what happened there, it must be an extremely worrying time because they're seeing tyranny unfold before them.
I would agree with that. Well, Mike, of course, part of the scam that the British government is carrying out at the moment is to have everybody terrified of a terrorist threat. And Foreign Office at work here, I think.
Well, the Foreign Office has set up this website, Dash UK Government Response, and alongside that, they've set up a Twitter account. And I just wanted to... sorry, I should put that up, actually. I just wanted to highlight this tweet that they pushed out this morning. Is this really a good use of British public money? So they've set up a table. They've put a tablecloth on the table, and they've put caricatures of Lavrov, Assad, and Putin behind the table. And the writing on the tablecloth says, "Proudly serving Syrians." The E of serving is crossed out, and the word serving is changed to starving. And the tweet the tweet itself says, "Starving civilians is an illegal act." An illegal tactic used by Assad. They can't even be bothered to spell Assad's name correctly. Sieges must be lifted to save civilians and secure peace for Syria. And, as we were highlighting with Vanessa Beeley a few days ago, Assad is not the person who is preventing this food getting through to the people of Madaya and other places in Syria. It is the armed opposition groups who are basically taking the food and storing it in their warehouses and then extremely inflating the prices for it. So anytime the UN or the Red Cross have asked for permission from the government to get food through, they've been given that permission. It's when they try to get into areas that are controlled by the opposition that they start having problems. So a blatant piece of propaganda from the UK government here.
It's interesting, Mike, isn't it, that the government is now forced to use social media to try and get its message across. This, to me, is the fact that basically the public are beginning to win by the speed at which information about Syria and other matters is going around on social media. And then as the government gets drawn into it, they make themselves look even more ridiculous because, of course, a government can't work social media. But despicable, I think, this tweet, with what we know that's going on. Well, why should we not trust our politicians? What better place to go than back with David north of the border? And of course, David, you had a very interesting meeting with Audit Scotland recently with Robert on the trail of the slush fund. I'll just bring this one in as well, and we'll pass it over to you to comment. But the Scottish Law Reporter back in 2012 was talking about money apparently being held to pay off, apart from anything else, media-friendly law firms in order to clamp down on the headlines. And then, if I've got this right, you meet up with this lady to ask about this slush fund. And she refers you to the ministerial code. Now, we've got part of that on screen, legal proceedings. We can bring that back, but we'll come over to you. How did that meeting go?
Yes, this was last Friday afternoon, just after the broadcast. We went down and had about an hour and a half long meeting with Angela Cullen and a colleague of hers. Now, the investigation into this matter has been going on for just over 4 months now. The first question, which essentially was the only question asked by Audit Scotland, was, is there a policy governing the disbursement of these funds, and was that policy followed? Now, that's the scope of the investigation. Now, it transpires that, yes, there is a policy within the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service for funding private civil legal action by their members of staff and former members of staff. But it then transpired that that policy was not the one used in this particular case. There is a Scottish Government ministerial code and a UK-wide ministerial code, the two documents being very similar. The Scottish one inexplicably being much longer than the British one, but clearly based on it. There's identical appendices, and the basic format of the thing is the same. So we were told that the money for Dame Elise Angelini to carry out private civil legal action, including the case against Robert Green, but not necessarily restricted to it, because there was lots of approaches to members of the press to keep Dame Elise Angelini's name out of the press in connection with the Holly Gregg case. We were told that this money was released in accordance with the ministerial code, and that this ministerial code is in fact a UK-wide document. Now, the fact that there is a Scottish version of this, I'm not clear exactly the significance of that, but we were definitely told it was the UK-wide ministerial code that was applied, and that it was the money was signed off by the head of the Scottish Civil Service, the Permanent Secretary, the most senior civil servant in Scotland. Now, we asked one of the first questions, can we see the ministerial code and the policy that that was enabled here? And we were told, probably not, that might be confidential, we're not sure, we'll need to check if we can release that to you. If it's in the public domain, fine. If not, then we don't think so. So it might still be secret. But in the public domain, there is the official ministerial code that is published on a UK basis, and also the Scottish version published by the Scottish Government. And the little bit there, which if you could bring that last slide back again, legal proceedings. Where ministers become involved in legal proceedings, their personal capacity, there may be implications for them in an official position. Defamation is an example of the area where proceedings will invariably raise issues for the minister's official as well as his or her private position. In all such cases, ministers should consult the law offices in good time and before legal proceedings are initiated, so that they may offer guidance on the potential implications and handling of the proceedings. No mention of cash there, Brian. In fact, none at all. So that makes me wonder whether there's in fact a completely separate part of the ministerial code that is secret, one would assume, that is not being shared with the British public, to the effect that ministers of the Crown, and that would include people like Sir Leon Britton, historically, Peter Morrison, and a whole host of other nefarious characters, can actually access essentially unlimited government funds for paying for legal services and use those funds to sue for defamation and silence people who might criticise them.
Well, David, yes. If I can just come in there, of course, they're not government funds, are they? The key thing about this is that the money is public money. I put the little cynical headline up at the top of that slide that Cullen claims that all's well with Angelini's use of the money. private prosecution. But this is public money which is actually being used.
Well, yes, it's taxpayers' money. It's proceeds of crime, to some extent. It's money that's taken coercively from the people of this country. We don't have a choice. It's mandatory. If you don't pay up, you go to jail. And then this money, which is meant to be used in the public interest, is then used to silence often valid, as we've found out in the Cyril case, etc., valid and most urgent criticism of the conduct of some of our wise overlords. So, yeah, our own money is being used in our oppression, it would seem.
It would certainly seem. So if we bring up the second one we've got here, this is another piece of code. This is the one actually I labelled public to pay for legal proceedings against themselves in the public interest, is roughly how I see this. But can you tell us about...
11.6 is the equivalent clause in the Scottish version of the Ministerial Code, which has basically had a small addition made to it after it says this, you'd consult law officers in order to allow law officers to express a view on the handling of the case so far as the public interest is concerned, or if necessary to take charge of the proceedings from the outset. Does that mean pay? I guess it means pay. It doesn't really quite say what take charge means exactly.
No, so we've got some ministerial code, we've got a policy, but the policy doesn't seem to match what Angela Cullen from Audit Scotland is saying. And as you say, there may now be a secret code that the public is not to be told about, secret from the public, even though it's public money being used for prosecutions to silence, well, maybe media, but it could well be individuals in the public who want to take action. How would you describe this?
Well, I think it's really a bit of a bombshell. I mean, Angela Cullen's view is that, well, she would expect any public authority to have this because otherwise they couldn't protect their members of staff from hostile and unfounded legal action by members of the public to interrupt them from conducting their duties, which is fair enough, I suppose. But we're not talking about that direction. We're talking about members of the public being targeted by civil legal action. We're talking about that civil legal action being funded by essentially an unlimited slush fund of taxpayers' money. And we're talking about, and this is a critical thing, the entire thing being secret. So you're sued by somebody, but you're not told that they have unlimited funds available. Is that not going to change an individual's assessment of the risks they run? Of course it is. We're in a situation where access to justice is really only for the rich. And what we're saying is, if you have a senior position in the UK government, you are, for all practical purposes, infinitely rich when it comes to access to the justice system. So we have an inherently imbalanced system there, and it's secret. I found almost nobody who knew this was going on.
Right, and I believe you've had some interest from two of the mainstream papers who also didn't know this was going on.
Yes, we've been contacted by the mainstream press over this. Quite a number of Robert's supporters have been writing letters to inform MPs and ask questions of MPs. And the mainstream press have been informed as well. So, yes, there is some interest in what is exactly going on here. And I would emphasise again, it's the secrecy. We don't know how much money's been spent on this. We don't know on whose behalf. We don't know for what, excuse me, for what cases. We don't know if it's been involved in other areas of the child sexual abuse scandal other than silencing Robert Greene. We don't know. We're not meant to know. Only our wise overlords know.
Right. Well, I'm just going to say that if a few viewers and listeners getting a little bit worried at what may seem like corruption north of the border, of course we shouldn't, because there is an independent assessor to have a look at these sorts of matters. And if we just bring the assessor up on screen, oh dear, it just happens to be Eilish Angelini from 2011 to date.
That's a shocker, isn't it?
It was a bit of a shock, yes. Tell us how you found this then.
Well, there's a series of these decisions, these high-level decisions on the use of the ministerial code and whether ministers have been breaching that code. are assessed by these independent assessors, and I want to emphasise, Brian, just how independent these independent assessors are. There's almost no limit to the independence. You can cut the independence with a knife. So these people are advising the government and checking up on the government, and these people plus the permanent secretary to the Scottish Government and presumably the equivalent in Whitehall make the decisions when it comes to how much money goes to which minister for what purpose when it comes to private civil legal action. Now, you see there's been a whole series of people employed to undertake this assessor work, this independent assessor work in Scotland. And since 2011, one of them has been Dame Elise Angelini, who was, of course, the beneficiary of, as far as we know, at least £56,000, perhaps much more, of taxpayers' money in order to silence criticism of her conduct whilst Lord Advocate and whilst Procurator Fiscal in Aberdeen concerning the handling of the Holly Gregg case. So she is maybe less independent. Maybe that could sway her. I don't know what you think, Brian.
Well, I can imagine a lot of people sort of laughing at this as it's ridiculous, it's just nonsense, but basically laughing at a system. The implications, though, are very much more serious than that, because what we've got is a political class who've now buried themselves in power, and they've set up a defensive mechanism so that you try and challenge these people and expose them. And what are they going to do? Use your own taxes to defend themselves. Remember, of course, that the judiciary, the single party and the police all linked together in Scotland. Go ahead, David.
Now, Dame Elise, excuse me, Dame Elise has provided one report in this role as an independent assessor, and it was concerning Alex Salmond. Alex Salmond had some people round for tea, and this was viewed as being somehow suspicious. And she did a very thorough report on this, which, if you exclude the cover page, ran to 2 whole pages of A4. Yep. But it actually makes quite interesting reading. If you've got any part of that.
Let's bring this up on screen. Here's the government website talking about it. Independent report clears the First Minister in Bute House complaint. And the complaint was misuse of public money. And we're reassured here, I can bring it up on screen, here we are, the Right Honourable Dame Eilish Angelini, DBE QC, an independent advisor to the Scottish Government on the Ministerial Code, has found there was no breach of the code during this meeting. There was no prima facie evidence which might have formed the basis of a statable complaint under the code. Of course, we don't know what the code is, but it wasn't breached. And the First Minister responded here that he'd known the people he'd invited to Bute House, the Weirs, for many years as fellow members of the SNP. He had read of their good fortune in winning the lottery, congratulated and invited them to tea, as you do.
The second paragraph there is a thing of beauty, and I just want people to bask in the glory of this paragraph.
Well, please read it, David, because your accent just adds to it.
Mr. and Mrs. Mr. and Mrs. Weir duly attended for tea and biscuits with the First Minister on 9 September 2011 at Bute House. The tea, which was Scottish blend, and biscuits, type undefined, were provided from the First Minister's own private supply kept in the kitchen of his private apartment in Bute House. I, Dame Elise Angelini, was shown the kitchen and the supply of tea and milk and biscuits stored therein. The First Minister indicated that there had been no discussion of money or donation during the visit, and no one else had attended the tea. Shortly after the visit, Mr. and Mrs. Weir made a very substantial financial donation to the funds of the SNP.
Well, I had a little bit of a pointer here. I think we do know what the cakes were. We'll come on to those in a minute. Of course, nothing to see here. No impropriety, no misuse of public funds, no dirty deals to get funding into the SNP, because it's been independently assessed by an assessor who's able to use funds which she assesses in order to clear her name when she doesn't do her job.
But look at how it was assessed. Right, Dame Elise Angelini personally went along and interviewed the biscuits. she didn't seem to talk to the Weirs who gave the donation. At least if she did, it's not in the report.
No.
If you were undertaking that investigation, Brian, would you start with the biscuits?
Well, if you wanted to achieve a cover-up, I think the first place you go is the cupboard. I would go for the cupboard first, because that way the cover-up will just follow. But the tea cakes, of course, very important. Let's bring more of those. Here they are, a lovely lady and some children dancing as Tunnocks tea cakes. Now, apparently, this is a pretty serious subject.
Eat a Tunnocks tea cake now in Scotland is a political statement, Brian. It's a unionist plot if you eat a Tunnocks tea cake. Right. This was a celebration of Tunnocks tea cakes at the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games, and we had the dancing tea cakes, which were very popular at the time. But that was before, critically, the independence referendum campaign, when Tunnocks as a company came out and said that they would much prefer to stay in the Union. They sell an awful lot of tea cakes in England, and they're very keen on the English enjoying their tea cakes. So they wanted to stay in the Union, and they got protests outside the factory, and they were called traitors to the cause. So now to enjoy a tea cake would be a political statement.
Right, and so that everybody knows, these are the delightful little chocolate-covered marshmallow on a biscuit-based tea cakes. I've always liked them. I thought some of the comments in the paper is extremely rude. But I understand, perhaps we will bring the slide on screen if we can. I had heard that these tea cakes are going to be used to kickstart the Scottish economy.
Well, we need all the kick-starting we can get. We seem to have a sugar-based economy now, and we are needing, well, we don't have oil, and I saw that there was a major closure of an electronics factory, the Texas Instruments factory near Greenock, announced this week. We obviously don't have a steel industry anymore, and although whiskey and produce we're still okay in, we need to be manufacturing more, I would suggest, Brian, so that would include tea cakes.
Yeah. Okay, well, of course, the man at the centre of the tea cake and donation scandal was Alex Salmond. I thought we'd do a live UK column analysis of Alex Salmond's involvement with Holly Greig, looking at his performance under the 7 principles of public life. So the first one is selflessness. Holders of public office should act solely in terms of the public interest. Do you think that he did that?
Silence. It's difficult to interpret silence. I mean, silence is silence in the public interest. I don't think silence is in the public interest when it comes to child rape and the concern over the inadequate investigation, which didn't involve questioning any of the alleged perpetrators. So no, I don't think he satisfied the code in that regard. Okay.
So we're going to we'll bring the man in so we can see him. I think we'll cross out the first one. He hasn't achieved that. Integrity. Holders of public office must avoid placing themselves under any obligation to people or organisations that might try to influence their work. Well, I'm going to put a cross in there because we've heard the tea cake story and I don't believe a word of it. Objectivity. We've got holders of public office must act and take decisions impartially, fairly, on merit, using the best evidence and without discrimination or bias. Is that why he won't answer questions about Holly Greig on LBC Radio? A tick or a cross?
I think that has to be a cross.
Okay, good, because I didn't actually have a tick ready to go. Accountability. Holders of public office are accountable for their decisions and actions and must submit themselves to whatever scrutiny is necessary to ensure this. Well, we come back to the cake story.
The entire Holly Greig story has been one where there has been no accountability. We've seen darkness, we've seen mist, we've seen smoke obscuring the facts. What we've not seen is any clarity, and we've not seen any accountability anywhere from any part of the Scottish establishment. Okay, well, thank you for that. Well, we'll strike out accountability, and I think you've also mentioned openness really there. Honesty, he should be truthful. Well, has he been truthful? Well, we do have the letter from his office, written on his behalf, which said that they had answered the Freedom of Information request in January of the given year, when it in fact was not answered until the July, and that was one day before the entire Scottish Government was held in contempt of court over the failure to answer that Freedom of Information request. So that letter would not be truthful, no.
Okay, well, this is looking fairly conclusive. We'll cross that one out as well. The last one's leadership. Holders of public office should exhibit these principles in their behaviour. Well, clearly he hasn't, so we'll cross that one out. And I think we can bring in here that his score under the 7 principles is 0. Well, if that's Alex Salmond, probably you'd like to talk a little bit about this man, Sir Peter Housden.
Just before we do, those 7 principles, that comes from Annex A of the Ministerial Code. Both the UK and the Scottish version have an identical annex. So anybody writing to any minister who might want to hold them to account might want to attach a copy of that annex to the letter, just to point out the standards that are in fact required of a UK or Scottish or Welsh or Northern Irish minister.
Okay. Well, what about this gentleman then, Mr. Housden? He's come under a bit of an attack.
Well,
he was
Mr. Housden is the very special human being that signed off the money for Dame Elise Angelini to take out the private civil legal action against Robert Greene and others, including members of the press in Scotland. So he thought it was a good idea. This is one of the things we discovered at the meeting with Audit Scotland. We didn't know where the money had come from. We didn't know who had approved it. Well, we do now. It's Sir Peter Housden.
So we're going to score him 0 under the ministerial code. He's failed.
And it's interesting to note that he approved the money under the ministerial code, and the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service paid it out of their budget, but at his instruction. So that's where the money actually came from.
Right, so more questions to be asked, but of course this man was bullying Scottish firms to make sure that they made the right decision over Scottish referendum. And then the Telegraph here asking, has the Scottish Civil Service become an arm of the SNP? We're now getting into what's really happening. North or south of the border, the civil service totally politicised. Tony Blair, of course, really rammed this home. And we're now paying the price because we've got no impartiality amongst our civil servants.
I would like to point out that Dame Elise Angelini was officially depoliticised by Alex Salmond in a move which removed her from regular attendance at the Cabinet in Scotland. It was actually announced as a move to depoliticise the role of the Lord Advocate. So believe that if you will. Okay.
And we had this one here, which was very interesting. Telegraph again, saying that Sir Peter Housden is a problem. When we got into this article, I was intrigued to see that it drifts in Michael Heseltine saying, well, really, we need to change the structure of the country, and the economy should be based on the strength, initiative and ambition of our cities and their communities. This is Mike's warning of the creation of the city-states, principally under the European Union. But how does this look north of the border?
Well, that article also describes Sir Peter Housden as Alex Salmond's narc. Right? The implication being anything that was discussed in a UK level amongst the UK civil service would immediately be fed back to Alex Salmond and used to break up the UK. And there was therefore a reluctance amongst Whitehall mandarins to talk to Scottish mandarins because the trust had to some extent broken down. This was all in the run-up to the independence referendum.
Okay, well, you've clearly been having a look into Mr. Housden, and I was intrigued with these video clips, which unfortunately we can't play because we don't own them, but we can have a look at some screenshots. So your point was that this man seems to be into every modern political initiative going. Early years collaborative launch here on the 1st of the 10th, 2012. And I've got another one here. This is a wider strategy to tackle inequalities in society. You smell something pretty serious coming in with this, and I hope I've got this in the right place, but you're looking at what's happening under Housden, and you're looking at what's in this book, The Entrepreneurial State.
Yes, so Housden, being the head of the Scottish Civil Service, is carrying on from his predecessor, Sir John Elvidge, also head of the Scottish Civil Service, in introducing the new form, the new model of government into Scotland. Now, no one in Scotland was asked about this. The people of Scotland were not consulted. People of Scotland didn't even know it was happening. This was brought in by the civil service. Principally, it's pushed by the civil service. It was rubber stamped by the parliamentarians, by the SNP administration. But the impetus seemed to come wholly from within the civil service. And they got the ideas from America and books such as The Entrepreneurial State. So what this is based on is the manifest failure of the welfare state approach to managing a society. We have increasing underclass in society, people with no job and no hope of job and no experience of a job. We have parts of society which are falling into ever greater sickness, levels of disability, and because of the welfare state, the productive parts of society are taxed in order to pay for it, so they're becoming ever less productive. And there is an end point coming. I'm sure the officials can see the end point coming when the system simply breaks. The reason that we're always in deficit, and despite all the talk of austerity just now, we're still spending money we're not raising in taxes. We're still assembling the national debt, and this is the good times. This is before the next recession really hits. This is when everything's rosy in our garden. We're not actually paying our way, and we have an ever larger, ever more dependent society. And they know they need to get something done about it. But what they really need to get done, in my opinion, is to shrink the size of the state by at least 50%. And get a lot of people diverted into actual productive roles in society rather than simply shuffling paper and oppressing one another. And they're not prepared to do that. They're not prepared to give up the power. So they're looking around for any ideas they can borrow from anywhere to kick the can down the road and pretend to do something. And they've got all this information from a movement in America recognizing the same sort of problems, that wants to bring entrepreneurial activity, free market drive and initiative into the public sector. Now that, Brian, is impossible. That cannot be done, because the reason the free market is the free market is in the title. It's free. There's competition. You have choice. As soon as you bring in the government with coercion and the threat of violence and the presence of compulsion in everything they do, named person, taxation, everything they do is done through compulsion and ultimately backed by the threat of violence. That is not the free market. It can never be the free market, and it will never be the free market. But the mixture of the two ideas is to extend the government into ever more personal areas of our lives, and in Scotland, at any rate, make the government a large, joined-up super organisation, very much like a corporation.
Very much like a corporation. Well, thank you for that analysis. We're going to be showing in a minute where some of the ideology for this has come from, and it absolutely linked in with what you produced for us earlier this morning. Just delving into Peter Housden, we see that he began his career as a teacher in Shropshire. That's quite interesting. And then he became Director of Education in Nottinghamshire County Council in 1991. Of course, he didn't know anything at all about the abuse of youngsters going on there. And by 1994, he'd gone to Council Chief Executive, still didn't know what was going on. And then in 2001, he left to take up a secondment with the UK Audit Commission. Well, that'd be handy, before joining the Department for Education and Skills. So we just repeat that he didn't know anything going on about child abuse in Nottingham. No idea at all as leader, but now this man is buried into Scotland doing good works there. Before I pass,
his post is over now. He finished work in, I think, October 2015. He was in post from 2010 to 2015. So we have a new broom in Scotland. We've yet to get any sense of what that new broom might mean. But what we've seen in the previous two heads of the civil service is very much working to a common agenda, a common purpose.
Common purpose, yeah. Okay, well, this is just really an interlude, but Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire has put up a very interesting article around the original Scallywag magazine, which is now turned up online. Scallywag really getting into investigation of paedophile rings around and through government. And then, of course, the editor died under rather mysterious circumstances. But if you want to have a look at what Scallywag had to say many, many years ago about the state and abuse of children, you can follow the link through from 21st Century Wire. Well, of course, it was Common Purpose that had paedophiles embedded in the secretive Common Purpose links. And surprise, surprise, we can now bring Common Purpose into the frame. Lovely picture of Julia here. I think she might have had a few tea cakes, actually, Alex. Sorry, David. But of course, what's the connection? Well, the connection is here's Peter Housden, and very big on Common Purpose. And I take it you were curious that the videos had exactly the same viewing figures on them.
No, it's the same video. It's just two stills from the same video.
Right. Okay.
So this is Peter Housden, Common Purpose man, speaking on leadership. In the video with Middleton. The reason I circled the little countdown there is a great many thumbs down and not many thumbs up, and I wondered, Brian, if maybe you were something to do with that.
Well, possibly, but let's give Mr. Housden credit. He doesn't seem to have had the tea cakes, but Julia certainly seems to have been tucking in. Right. We also voted Common Purpose under the 7 principles in public life, actually, and I've had to give them a 0 because we can't see anything they do helps the system. Well, why is Common Purpose important in this news and our discussion at the moment? Let's bring in this email that we had this morning. It's for a lady who said, sorry, bring it on screen, here we are. I've just bought a Ladybird book. I think this was in Sainsbury's in the book section. And basically, it's a Ladybird book on mindfulness. Now, I have had a few people challenging me over mindfulness. They're telling me that actually it's a wonderful thing and I needn't be worried about it. However, what these individuals don't seem to realise, of course, is that the spiritual mindfulness has gone. This has now been replaced by a politicised mindfulness. And thank you very much to the person who brought the next one in. Now, I'm apologise because I'm going to bring several things up on screen at once. What we're interested in is the Thunderbird Global Mindset Institute. And that incredible organisation has produced a huge document, about 140, 150 pages. What are they doing? Well, they're looking at the science and practice of global leadership. They're measuring people, and global mindset is a set of individual characteristics that help global leaders better influence individuals, groups, and organisations unlike themselves. So this is like Common Purpose on steroids. And if you get into their document, it starts to really tell you what they're about. Umbrella concept that contains intellectual, psychological, social dimensions. It's the capacity of a person in international business to influence individual groups, organisations and systems related to global leadership. A person who possesses a global mindset would tend to be a more effective global leader than a person without this mindset. So we've got an organisation clearly very powerful and influential, now openly saying they're going to get into the minds of people and select them. And we will discuss where this takes us.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say that the Civil Service today had published a blog describing how when you're an up-and-coming leader, you've really got to have a mentor. Now, if you've got mentors or people in that position already in place, pushing that are based on this kind of thing, then anybody coming up below them in the system is going to receive a massive dose of this as well. That's the case, isn't it?
That is absolutely how it works. And of course, UK Column has already exposed that we've got a gentleman I believe Peter Botting, if I remember his name correctly, embedded in Westminster, who is giving the leadership training to Tory MPs and Labour MPs. I think the boast was that he's trained over 82 of them as to how to deliver better speeches. Well, this is dangerous stuff. We can see where this goes. But if you really want to get into it, have a look at the video on the Thunderbird website where we've got the guru, Mansur Javidan, talking about it. And he says the issue is that children grow up with people like themselves, basically. How can we prepare them for what global companies want? So there's no messing around here. Children need to be moulded, not for their own benefit and lives and enjoyment of their own lives, but for what the shelf stackers, and as we showed yesterday, we had McDonald's in amongst it. And then I'll just come back here to common purpose, cultural intelligence. This absolutely fits the Thunderbird global mindset. And of course, this devious political charity buried in the heart of government, north and south of the border. This is about a very sinister psychological attack. David, I was shocked when we discovered exactly how far common purpose had penetrated north of the border. And of course, Northern Ireland, we had reports from people which have been substantiated saying, well, if you look at the intensity of the common purpose subversion in Northern Ireland's government, it's running the place. This is a very dangerous organisation.
It is now the last two heads of the civil service in Scotland, and the civil service is actually running Scotland, not the politicians. The last two heads have been very senior common purpose people. So one question we'll try and get an answer to is whether the current head of the Scottish Civil Service is in fact a common purpose graduate or common purpose person or not. Be interesting to find out. Yes, they're everywhere, and there are a certain set of values that keep coming up. They come mostly from the States. They come quite a lot of the time from the UN, and they seem to be penetrating every aspect of our society, every aspect of our government, every aspect of such things as education policy and health policy. We see it in the early years initiatives in Scotland where some extremely doubtful alleged scientific evidence about the impact of the first 3 years of life on a human being has been used to justify unlimited government intervention into the family. We see it in the health service, where the fact that the government are picking up the bill for any decisions that we might make that affect our health give the government the right to start to dictate every aspect of how we live, how much exercise, what weight, and all the rest of it that might affect the individuals, the choices an individual might make. We see it in some very strange belief systems which might seem quite happy-clappy, very naive concepts of happiness and well-being, and nothing can be defined, nothing can be pinned down, nothing can be made exact. There is no precision about any of it. But there is the same general pseudo-religious move towards belief in the state and belief that the individual must really do as he or she is told.
Is told, yeah. Right, well, just with an eye on the clock, David, time always moves very quickly. Of course, psychological attack, where does the government want to attack most? It's the minds of our children. This article here, very devious reporting by the Mail. So the headline is Gender Madness, Trans Girl Demi Boy Intersex. A government survey, this is from the Children's Commissioner of England, is asking 13-year-olds to pick from 25 genders. And of course, we had a survey, a questionnaire that had been passed around Cornish schools, and it was getting into that sort of area. We're not living now in a heterosexual society. It's going into plus. And if you have a look at what the little plus, which is being added to LGBT issues, you will see they're going into some very, very dirty areas. But of course, if you can get into the minds of children early enough, you can completely destroy their morality and personality. And of course, where's the picture come from in this article? Well, this is BBC. I'm just going to bring this one in. I just wanted to say, what is this stuff about? Well, if you think about it, we've got chaos, wars, strife, cultural, religious antagonism, starvation. The environment's now being put above mankind. That's what's going on in the world. We pressurise people with poorly paid, unrewarding jobs. We've got advertising pressures, fashions, work, getting to the top, false role models, drugs, drink. That's depressing them. We add in BBC, of course, EastEnders, classic example of an attack on people's minds, TV and films, death, suicide, child abuse. And once you've got people down at that level, you offer them the solution. We can give you happiness with a dose of mindfulness or common purpose NLP or psychotherapy. I know people are going to say, I'm a psychotherapist and I help people. I'm sure you do. I'm talking about politicized psychotherapy. We're going to empower you with hypnosis, and that leads to the hive mind. We've got to deal with this stuff, David. How do we expose the danger of this type of thing?
People go mad in herds, but get sane again one person at a time. The exposure has to come in the form of facts, in the form of explanation, in the form of one person at a time in this country saying, I see it now. I see what they're doing. I'm not going to fall for that. The hive mind is a very important concept. The collectivist, communitarian idea, we see it hugely in Scotland. We have a whole political class that when it talks about independence can only perceive that word as having any meaning when you're talking about the collective group. It does not appreciate that a word like liberty, a word like freedom, has a meaning for an individual separate from the hive, separate from the group, separate from the tribe.
Okay, well, David, I think that really brings us to the end of the news today. We've got some subjects we haven't covered. I think we'll group those up to deal with separately because they are very important and emotive subjects, such as immigration, for example. But I'm going to say thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you get a bit of the sunshine there in Scotland. And I believe that the key to sunshine in Scotland is to invite Robert Greene north of the border. Is that correct?
This is true, yes. The only time we've seen sun really for the last, although it's just peaking out now, we're talking about him. The only time we've seen any sun in the last 3-4 weeks in Scotland is when Robert Greene stepped foot off this train onto the platform in Waverley Station in Edinburgh on Friday. The sun came out and it stayed out until sunset. We call it the Robert Greenhouse effect. It seems to work every time he comes north, and we're very happy about it, and we'll keep bringing him north in order simply to see the sunshine.
Brilliant. Thanks for joining us. Well, that's the end of today's news. Thank you for watching or listening wherever you are. We would ask you, use the information that we're putting out, tweet it, talk about it, email it, comment on it. Don't just sit on it. Please help us to spread the information and the analysis that we are doing. We are not here to provide a show. We don't regard ourselves as entertainment. We're putting out information because that information is capable of exposing what is going on, and the exposure is capable of stopping what is going on. So we try to do our part. We hope that our viewers and listeners will do their part. Don't sit doing nothing, do something, and enjoy the weekend. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.